Welcome, Robby. It's episode number 6 of the World XP podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. It's been a couple of weeks since we've had an episode. Life has happened, but here we are. We're back. We were talking the other day about what's going on just in the world in general. It seems so chaotic, and I was over some of the stuff that I was listening to, and I've been thinking about. It's like the balance between order and chaos, and like yin and yang, almost from the Eastern traditions. And it seems to me that we're struggling to make order of the chaos. In our conversation, I kind of likened it to, I feel like I'm on this like life raft of order, like trying to make sense of the chaos around. And it's almost like that's kind of what life is, right? So you need chaos because you have to confront it, like confront the dragon, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
From those ancient fairy tales and stuff. But you need it because once you confront that adversity or that chaos, it's done. Like you graduate school, you have that sense of accomplishment for 5 seconds, and then it's like, okay, what's next? Yeah. So you need that continuing chaos, but it seems to me that the chaos is starting to overwhelm the sense that people are being able to make of it. And I've noticed that a lot with people our age. You see like higher rates of anxiety, and that seems to me kind of like people get anxious because when they can't make sense of the world around them. And so the more that people aren't able to make sense or make order of the chaos that's around them, the brain starts, I don't know what the specific mechanisms
Anxiety,
are.
I think, is a really good...
Yeah, the hormones or whatever that kick off once you can't, like the panic ones that you start to become anxious when you don't know what's going on in a certain situation. Mm-hmm. Like people just don't know what to do with life at the moment because a lot of our institutions that we've known, like the cable news, for example, it used to be like, hey, I'm going to go on the cable news and they're going to tell me what's going on, and now people don't trust them. So we've had to retrain this institution or this thing that I've trusted for X number of years. Like now I look back on that and I'm like, were they really telling the truth the whole time? And it warps your worldview. Yeah. It's almost the same as if you're in a long-term relationship and you get cheated on. It's like everything you've known up to that point is now not true. Not that it's not true, so to speak, but your view on everything that's happened for those however long that relationship was or however long that thing was is now completely changed. I feel like that's kind of where we're at. Everything's starting, everybody's worldview is just being thrown up in the air and disintegrated into, I don't even know.
Yeah, you bring up so many completely awesome topics that you do, I think, really well. You described we have our age, our millennials mostly, right? Have a great anxiety about what's happening in the world, whether it be through coronavirus or it be through institutional corruption or systematic racism. All of these things are this chaos of the world seems to be engulfing us,
overwhelming,
just flooding, and the waters are getting to the neck, which that's anxious. We've watched Fear Factor enough. I don't know, maybe. If we're millennials, we've watched Fear Factor. Let's be honest here. And Joe Rogan is still somehow part of our lives.
In a totally weird way. And now the order side of things.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Okay, I'll just kind of... I took a few notes about... This is the first time in our conversations where we've taken notes. There's almost a paradox, I think, to the order of the world. So in my background, perhaps my expertise in this is because in Christianity is my part. I'm studying to be a Catholic priest. There was an early group of Christians, an early sect of Christians that broke away from, and basically they ended up creating a heresy. It starts really small, but then kind of the divisions grow larger and larger. And they're called Gnostics, and they had this view of the world that it's kind of like this yin and yang. So they borrowed a lot from the East. Christianity began in the East, and in Palestine, and then many of the Easterners in that area, right? So they adopt that. And so there is some of this inflow of Eastern thought that melds well. And in this particular case with Gnosticism, there's a good God and an evil God.
Mm-hmm.
The Gnostics and the Christian idea, they thought, okay, good. Evil God, that's the God of the Old Testament. Because we saw the flood, we saw God smiting a whole lot of people. Evil God, that's him. Chaos. Versus good God, that's the God of Jesus. Super calm, super sweet.
The one that'll answer your prayers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so these two are constantly fighting each other. And the reality of this is that that's not true. I don't think that's true, and the church is strongly by the 300s really condemned that as an idea. There really only is one God. There really, and if there are these kind of two things that are fighting, there's still philosophically there just has to be something greater than that. It's not a philosophically coherent idea that there be these two things that are facing off in order to because there still must be some first greatest thing which truly we call God. But you end up with this. What do we still do with this question about reality? What do we still do with this question about the paradox of chaos and order in our world? And I think it's actually because there's a little bit, maybe chaos isn't the right word maybe that I'm trying to say here, but maybe there's a bit of surprise that we can always find in order, right? You look at the human person, right, and from the outside, right, great, you got 5 fingers here and 5 fingers there, each side, okay, great, and you got an eye on each side and an eye on each side, and then you leg on each side, and you whole body
right,
symmetrical right down the middle.
Right.
And then you look at the heart and you see, wait, where's the one for the other side? Why is there suddenly this little difference about where there has been this great symmetry? How is there suddenly something different? And I think that's that surprise to us. It's not one of chaos, but it's one actually of the variability in which order can exist. So how does that actually tie in with chaos? The reality is that chaos exists in our world. The Christian and the Christian source of this chaos is very simply put, departing from the will of God. So when you look back into the scriptural sources, we see Adam and Eve and Satan and the tempter leading them astray and bringing about chaos in the world, and you certainly see that in this creation account. You absolutely totally see it. You see before that event in Genesis, you see Adam and Eve living in harmony with God, walking with Him in the afternoon.
Right.
They're naked, just hanging out with each other, so they have no self-consciousness about themselves. They're in total harmony together, and they're in total harmony with the world because with the rest of creation. Then, there's the apple, there's the fall, there's them saying, yeah, we want to be like God, and there's the deception that the devil has in there, and it's an absolutely fascinating thing if you haven't really kind of dug into what's happening in the story there. But what results is Adam's punishment is that he's going to till the earth and it's going to hurt. Eve's punishment is that childbearing will hurt. Right, so they are then basically opposed to experience chaos with creation. They begin to blame each other, right? God asks, hey Adam, did you eat that apple? And he immediately blames Eve. And it's immediately their relationships with each other are then chaotic.
Right.
And terrible. And they realize they're naked. They realize they have their own anxiety. Oh my gosh, I'm self-conscious about myself. They look in the mirror and they go, I don't like this. And they go in and hide themselves.
Right.
What they had with God before, they had that union with God, was broken, and they run. And when God, it says he goes into the garden searching for Adam, and he calls to him, and Adam's hiding. So Adam again is away. So there's this chaos that enters into the world, and that chaos that began there. I mean, it goes through generation to generation. It just gets passed on.
It's interesting. I was thinking about Adam and Eve actually in the car, just on the way here, and how religion ties into, it almost seems to me like religion, generally speaking, is a way to confront the chaos that was unleashed during the fall.
Yeah.
And so when you have, right, Adam, so I thought this out better in the car. So Adam and Eve, the fall happens, chaos is unleashed in the world, and then therefore they have to work to confront that chaos moving forwards in their lives. And then religion is kind of the framework in which you are supposed to confront that chaos in a noble and truthful manner, kind of. And it depends. Like, obviously, different religions have different specificities about the different sort of rituals and things of that nature. But one of the things that came out of that confronting of the chaos is that humans discovered that you could bargain with the future in terms of sacrificing, right?
Yeah.
So, hey, I'm going to sacrifice this thing, whether it's my time or in terms of the Aztecs, a human head, or and whatever the case is, and it's for different things. So like the Mesoamerican cultures, they would make sacrifices so the sun would rise the next day,
right?
Or I don't have other examples off the top of my head, but that's been a theme consistent throughout humanity, and that's a very interesting concept, to be able to delay gratification in order for a better future. And that's always been something, and that's kind of how the Israel, I guess, throughout the Old Testament was kind of going through. So they would go through hardships and confront the chaos, right? And they would do the things within the framework of religion until they stopped doing those things, and then they got walloped by God and sent back to Egypt to go through the plague and the rest of it, until they started confronting it in that framework again. And then so they've been built on this set of principles, like, hey, this is a good way to act, right? And then the story of Moses going up the mountain to get the commandments is like, okay, now those principles are written down. And it's kind of weird that to extract out into writing those principles that humans had already been kind of doing. It's like they already kind of knew, like this is probably the best way to act, or this is probably a good way to act.
Good.
Generally, and then to extract out those principles into written stories or parables, different thoughts, like in the Bible story, like whether or not you take the biblical stories as literal, the lessons that can be learned from those are those principles that have been acted out just in writing, in the form of, like, stories are the ways in which humans can act. And most of those stories involve some sort of confronting of a hardship or an adversity, or, generally speaking, some sort of chaos.
Yeah.
And confronting it in the right way. And so what that right way is, it can vary, but generally they're pretty similar. If you look across different cult, like Judaism, Christianity, even like the Eastern traditions, it's all fairly similar. And which is, when you think about it, is really wacky that all of, like, if you just look across, it's like, well, that's kind of the same as that one, and they say pretty much the same things about this one, about you should probably tell the truth and sacrifice different things and whatever else. And so I was thinking about that in the car. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like my mind was just kind of going, and it had gone off the conversation that we had before, but I don't know what you think about that.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so maybe I should have, like, prefaced the whole Adam and Eve aspect with this, but that regardless of the reason that I understand chaos also is in relation to God is that I'm a theist, right? Like, I believe there is a God. Regardless whether you believe in a God or not, and you if you recognize there's chaos in the world, then we have to understand it somehow. So in my own experience, I'll say that too. But also in my belief, is that we can only really make sense of the world through the reality that God exists. Otherwise, we kind of end up in a lot of different places. But because to make what you say about religion is that basically there is an interaction between humanity and the supernatural, whether it be a true bargaining, a true interaction between man and the divine that produces actual divine effect, is not all that's not always the case, even though they think it might be. But the reason that I think we see religion, and particularly the thing of sacrifice, throughout the entire, really all indigenous cultures. It's a big leaping statement that I can't back up.
I can't think of one where
sacrifice is not a part.
Yeah.
Right, we're giving something over to God, or we're giving something to sacrifice so that Pachamama will then, Mother Earth will then bless and give us copious crops for the next year.
Yeah, good harvest, or the sun will rise the next day, or whatever the case is. There's always some sort of. I can't think of anyone where there wasn't some form of that.
So I think the reason for that is that either that points to. What I think that points to is that there's a reality that we do. There are actually, there's an immediate recognition that there are many things that are beyond our control. And that can cause anxiety when we recognize, great, this is beyond my control. How much coronavirus gets into my community, that's completely out of my control. That causes me anxiety. But if I say, okay, I know that there's something more powerful than what I can do. I know there's this God that can then keep me safe from coronavirus. I've got to give him something. I've got to kind of cut him a deal so that way he'll protect me.
Right.
I think that's a natural inkling, and I think at least the beginnings of a real spiritual life, in recognizing that I don't have control of this, and I need something else to help me. I think that's just an aspect of our nature that a good theology, a theology that makes sense, will always match with the nature, right? If I said in order to be Christian you actually have to have 11 fingers, no, that's literally it's against the nature. It's not against the nature. It's against the nature. You can't we have to take a finger from someone else and attach it to my own, right? There's some way in which what is supernatural must complement and accentuate and make better what already is natural. So in the ancient sense, that's make better our crops, make better our health and our safety. And then the question is, okay, where do people get these ideas about what to sacrifice and how to sacrifice? Because you see it. Human sacrifice certainly happened in the Aztec culture, right? That's an interesting case where they would sacrifice humans in order that the sun might rise, which was completely false. And when the conquistadors go in and they stop all the human sacrifice, and so they stop murdering, the sun continues to rise, and it literally sends shockwaves through the entire culture and decimates the entire Aztec culture, because the very hinge point of the sun god, which was their most powerful god, the source of all of heat and of for the plants to grow, he's basically killed. He's shown to be not real, right? Because these sacrifices actually didn't mean anything.
Yeah, it's a institution in their culture that was completely turned upside down
because it was completely false.
Right.
So, right, that's a way in which the supernatural must be in accord with the natural. You look at this, and there's a similar sort of thing actually in the Bible with, not just in the Bible of some other weird culture, but the Jews themselves. They sacrifice their children. In Jerusalem, there's a valley Right, like if you think of it in the Gospels, Jesus leaves Jerusalem, goes through the valley, and then goes to the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah.
In that valley was where some Israelite kings actually sacrificed their own children to foreign gods so that they might be protected. Right, so one, they're being like, okay, God has asked and has spoken with them and told them, hey, this is how I want you to be on good terms with me, and I can make you a light to the world and prosper your people and help you. They completely turn back on that. They don't just turn back on God and say like, no, I'm going to go do my own fun thing over here. They literally turn to like
a different,
complete utter evil of like their like newborn child. We're going to sacrifice this brand new life, rip it from the arms of the mother, and sacrifice it to this God. Question is like, okay, why does Israel at that time think that they have a need to make this sacrifice to this other guy as opposed to this one? And the answer, I mean, at that time at least, was they thought that the other God would help them. They thought that the other God would help them, and that the God of Israel was not going to help them. The God of Israel was going to make them live a good life, a life not consumed by money, not consumed by power, and not consumed by a great and vast army, by all that power. But they said no, and they said no. Instead, we want to try our hand at this thing, and it did not go well.
So what was the appeal of? So I have two thoughts. But what was the appeal of the other guy?
So the other god came in from another culture through Jezebel. She was a Phoenician, and she brought this god Baal in, and Baal, Baal, and through that they that was the custom amongst the Phoenicians to do that type of sacrifice, and very simply, the king believed his wife, his foreign wife, which he again also was told don't marry someone outside of the tribe, but he did, and for this reason she brings in and she says, no, like do this, let's do this thing, and that's how he's led astray.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The other thought that I had while you were talking about that some was so you were talking about where do those principles come from? Does it come from like a supernatural or a higher power? And that was something that I had grappled with for some time. It's like human beings are quite flawed.
Yeah.
So
how'd you find that out?
Yeah. Well, who knew? But anyways, for a human being to come up with, to be able to extract all of those principles that, so I want to put just for a second the Judeo-Christian tradition just aside, just for a second.
Yeah, keep getting
because the general framework or the general principles on which people live, right? The Buddhists were all about sacrifice, and the Hindus are the same, and living in poverty, right? You don't need material things. Yeah. That's like across cultures, they were all kind of like that. It's like, so for humans to kind of come up with that in a consistent manner across cultures seems very unlikely, I guess, to me. And so that kind of leads me, like we've talked before, I've kind of flip-flop on like, does God exist, does God not exist, and like kind of jump back on like I feel like God exists, and that might be weird for some people for me to come back to that now when all this bad stuff is happening. People be like, well, why would God let this happen? It's like, okay, well, it seems to me like people are not living through these principles or these frameworks that have been established throughout time in terms of selflessness delayed gratification, right? Technology has not helped us with that, I feel like, at all, right? You can get like, you post a picture on Instagram, you get like instantly. You need food, DoorDash, instantly. You need whatever. It's like Amazon right there at your door the next day. Like all these sorts of things, like, have been kind of pushed aside, I feel like. And so, not to say that you need to be like a religious fanatic or whatever,
right?
Because that's not what I'm getting at. But the principles generally that have come across religion seem to be not being followed so much now. And if those principles have come from a higher being or God,
mm-hmm.
and we're not following them, like that God said, hey, that's probably a good idea, and we are plunged into a world of chaos, it seems to me like either one of two things. Either one, we're just worse humans than before, which I feel like is unlikely because there's always good people and bad people. Or two, that what it shows to me is that human beings don't know how to create their own moral code. Because it seems though we're in the process of trying to make our own currently. It doesn't seem to be going very well. But to me, right? I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Other people could have a different opinion. And so it seems like that moral code or that framework needed to come from something perfect, right? A principle, right? You could say like in different cultures where the king or the leader became the god, so to speak, those cultures in history tended to end in a pretty terrible manner. Because in countries or nations that didn't have that, the sovereign wasn't the top. It was the principle of sovereignty of like, I'm your leader, but it's been given to me by this higher principle, whether it's God or the rule of the people, right? Is like these overarching principles that are always above like the top human, so to speak. And whenever there's a human at the top, like Soviet Union, China, like those are the two examples off the top of my head, but like Nazi Germany, tons of people die.
Yeah.
So it seems to me like with those examples, it doesn't seem likely to me that humans could have come up with such a consistent framework across time had it not been, I guess, revealed through, well, God, in a certain sense.
Yeah. I think, so if humanity, it's like only human, like just us, and has the say on what's right and wrong, and also on justice, there are going to be terrible things that are done.
Right.
Because then what happens is like, oh, what's going to be the best thing for us to do is to, whatever is the most pragmatic, like whatever is going to like build this and build a good economy that's going to literally be built off of slave labor. It's literally going to be built off of concentration camps.
And you and I might have different ideas of justice.
Right.
Which is,
so then the more powerful, the government is the one that ends up deciding what justice is.
Right.
And then when, like, look, in our country right now, I think the biggest reason we have an outcry for justice, isn't just the fact that we need it, but that, which we do. Like, there's some cases where justice needs to happen. And maybe it's not happening as it ought, but there is a reality where, like, if there is a God, there is an aspect of divine justice where the moral code that He has given, He will enact the justice on that also. So I mean, there's not just a temporal view of justice, which ought to be had in a proper manner.
Right.
But if there's no eventual divine justice, then it seems like chaos is just going to win in the end.
Right. And the other reason for that is because you and I have different ideas of justice. We're sitting in a courtroom.
Right.
Who's got the power to make that decision? Well, that doesn't seem very just, says somebody else who's sitting in there. So at what point does the final judgment, so to speak, right? It seems the more I've thought about it, the more it seems to make sense that the cultures and societies that have prospered or generally been considered like happy, not tyrannical, they are governed, and their societies are governed by principles that transcend a human being.
Yeah.
And so it's that plus the fact that the ones that don't try and go by those principles, the ones that try and go by, hey, I'm a human, I'm going to say what goes, I'm going to say what justice is, end pretty terribly. It's like those two things in combination lend me to kind of jump back onto like the God exists sort of thing. And then what's interesting about that, and for me, I know we've talked about this multiple times, but the idea of sacrifice as far as like different cultures having different, so let me parse this out a little bit. Different cultures have different gods. Polytheism, right? They have gods for different things. And so that doesn't seem to me to hold up against this is gonna I was gonna say science. But like using the Aztecs, for example, the sacrificing so the sun will rise, right, it's not a thing. The reason, because the sun, like the rotation of the earth and all the rest of it. But the way that the Judeo-Christian is laid out, it's like if you're going to sacrifice something that would be seen as like the sacrifice to confront all chaos, you would send down, if you were a god, or if I was God, I would send down, I would not have some human try and do it. I just feel like, because they'll probably mess it up. That's just me. So I would send down a piece of me or an extension of myself. And so when the Christian tradition says Jesus is the Son of God, He is the perfect sacrifice, you learn about that in religious school, but you don't actually understand, like, they don't teach you what it means. Because I don't know, does that make sense, kind of? So like that's kind of the conclusion that I've come to, and from the standpoint of even just thinking about it pragmatically, like if I was a god, I would definitely not have one of those wimpy humans try and do this thing for me, because that seems like a bad idea. Like if I'm going to show you how to do the correct sacrifice or the correct like bargain with the future, right? You need a better future, whether it's on this earth or in the afterlife. If you need the perfect one, I'm not gonna have an imperfect human being do that thing, right? I'm gonna send an extension of myself for them to try and emulate, but because no human is perfect, they're never gonna get to like this is the, and that also plays into the idea of God from the standpoint of, it seems to me like a god in a culture is the culmination of all the ideals that exist. So kind of the principles that become the framework, right? So you have this admirable quality, I have an admirable quality, Dylan has an admirable quality. Like once you get all of them together, once you pull all the admirable qualities with none of the bad ones, you kind of get your God or your perfect being, because he's got all of the admirable, he or she has all of the admirable qualities and none of the bad ones. And so that's what you're trying to emulate. And because no person has all good qualities and no bad ones, that's kind of like you want to emulate that person, and that person therefore becomes your God.
Yeah.
I think. Maybe. Kind of.
Yeah.
That's also why. And then that ideal is how you confront the chaos that exists in the world.
Right.
And so also kind of why superheroes are not the same as gods, but they might as well be. Like Thor is a superhero; he's basically a god.
Yeah.
So it's like they confront the chaos. They go confront the dragon. It's like the story of Saint George and the dragon. Like they go confront the metaphorical dragon, which is chaos, and they do it in a noble, in the framework that the principles of that religion have existed on. And I think the reason why especially the Marvel ones are so popular now is because all of those superheroes have very human qualities, right? Like Tony Stark is kind of a jackass sometimes, or like Hulk has the anger problems, or Captain America can be like preachy, right? Like they have like these very human elements, and so people can relate to them way more than like say Superman, who's just like this perfect like I'm Superman, right? So it's like I think that's why those are so popular, because they have these all of the admirable qualities. They're willing to sacrifice for a better future, right? And the last one, like Tony Stark sacrifices his life for the future of the planet, right? But he's still got this human side to him that I think people really relate to. So kind of jumped around, but generally speaking, to kind of sum it up, it's like you want your ideals as that's what you're trying to emulate as you confront the chaos that exists in front of you. And if you're going to sacrifice for the better future, if you are like the emulation of that perfect sacrifice or those perfect ideals, you want a part of the God to show you how to do that sacrifice. It's a lot to unpack.
It is, yeah. You're like in like 5 different areas, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, like the ideals, like a culture, like amalgamating all of its ideals into one being.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, aside really from the Judeo-Christian tradition, that monotheism of one omni-everything, like omniscient, omnipotent, all good, all loving, necessarily exists, right? Like you look at Greek myths and you see like Zeus is flawed in this way as a human is, and like you see he has these these qualities, and maybe that's actually why you good. And that's why I'm seeing like there's a greater connection between like what we see with superheroes. We see this not just this humanity, but this way in which their goodness is actually a little bit flawed.
I think that's why they're so relatable.
Right, which is
because
because we see ourselves in them.
Yeah, it's like something you want to emulate, but also like they mess up sometimes too, and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you certainly see that, like you see that in the Indian tradition. You see that in Indian tradition, and then also in the Greek tradition, where like the world is freaking chaos. Especially like at like their creation stories are like the world is absolutely chaos.
Yeah.
As far as I know, the only tradition that proposes a good creation narrative, a creation narrative where the world is seen as good,
started off as good anyways.
Is the Judean. The God created the heavens and the earth, and it was good. He created the sea and the birds to fill the two, and they were good. And then he creates man, and it was very good. And then from there, then we start to have our chaos.
Yeah, and then man messed it up, and that seems more likely to me. As like an all-powerful God would create a messed up world, it seems like he would create a good world, and then a human being would mess it up.
Yeah,
it seems more likely to me.
So then you go to this question. Okay, great. How, like, what is God in the world? What does he do about that? Right? Like, okay, so he's created this world. It was all good. It was great, and then something like his creation, like just like falls apart. Literally, like the thing that he loved the most, Adam and Eve, the thing that was very good, like just like run away from him.
Yeah.
So what in the world does he do about that? Jumping to like the end of the story, end of the event of like what does God do about that? Is like we were saying, like how in the world does God want to communicate to his creation that what he wants them to do? Sure, in one sense, how he wants them to sacrifice, how he wants them to have a better future. The only really sensible answer, not the sensible, the one that makes the most sense as someone who has stood in front of a room and tried to teach people before, is that you yourself go, right? Like if you want to best teach someone about if you're in a college and you want to teach this is what it's like to actually have this job in the real world, do you just stand up there and lecture about it the whole time? No, like you bring in a cop and you say like, yeah, kids, this is what cops do all day. Yeah, this is what a firefighter does all day. Yeah, this is what a doctor does all day. And they get to actually see and hear from the source. The incarnation, like God becoming man, is that exact thing. Yeah. It's God literally coming and saying, to keep it vague, like without getting into that the particularities of Christianity, this is how I want you to have the best future possible. This is how I want you to live. And this is how you're going to understand the world and how you're going to live amidst the chaos that absolutely exists amidst all of this world. Because like the time of Christ is relatively a time of peace. Yeah. During like the Roman Empire had literally just like conquered and killed everyone, and so like relatively a time of peace.
Relatively speaking, for that time, yeah. Right.
Like he literally comes into the world and in the land that is probably the most fought over place in the entire globe. So God literally comes to the very epicenter of
conflict,
chaos, conflict, dysfunction, and he comes and he says, "This is what I have."
Yeah, that also makes sense why it would be there and not somewhere else. Take the epicenter, like you said, the epicenter of chaos. It makes sense. Like,
but then also, what that then means is like if God comes there and he like that then becomes the epicenter of goodness. That's why like that place, like to Christians, is the Holy Land. Like it is the place in where our Lord walked, and like that's the place where it began.
Right.
And the goodness that is God's message to His people begins right there.
Yeah.
So yes, it's got all that conflict, but like no, it's also like the holiest place, which is like again just this crazy paradox of like everything matches up and it's all chaos and terrible, but then all of a sudden like wait, how did the heart get on that side and not in the middle and not on like there's one on the other side? Like how?
It's interesting. That shows to me at least the need for some sort of chaos in the world, right? Because you have to confront it. Because if you're just sitting there and everything is perfectly fine, you're just sitting on your bed, like getting fed grapes off the vine, right? What point of living life is that? Like that's boring, and I feel like that would there's no point because you have to confront the dragon, right, in a noble and truthful way. And if there's no chaos in the world, then you can't do that. Like if there's no dragon, metaphorical dragon, you can't go confront the dragon. So it's almost like it shows that kind of balance. I feel like that's for everything, right? Even like food, right? You can eat a bunch of French fries as long as you don't eat too much, right? You need that balance of like everything in moderation. What from a metaphorical space? It's like I was saying about like when you graduate school. It's like, okay, you went through those 4 years of like hardship and chaos, right? And now it's done. Yeah. And now you're sitting there like, well, that's over now. Now what? Yeah. And if you don't go find something else to do, you're going to be bored out of your mind and miserable. You're going to be living in your mind, like wherever, playing video games. Not that video games are a bad thing, because I play it, but like as long as you play video games in moderation, it's fine. But like you need to go find some purpose, because if you're not going after some purpose, you're just going to sit there and.
What is something? Okay.
And it has to be something worth going after. Which is a big distinction between I'm going to go after this thing and is this thing actually worth pursuing.
What is something in your life that you can't ever have too much like knowledge or too much of yourself that you just keep putting into? Like, what's something in your life that like no matter what, you could always spend more time doing it. You could always spend more time learning about that thing. You could always love more, maybe. Nothing?
No, because the amount of time that I spend on whatever that subject is learning about, I cannot just do it constantly.
Good, so not subjects.
Okay.
Because there is maybe at least like a finite end in which we can actually learn about something.
Right.
Okay, my suggestion to this would be it's a relationship. Like it's another person. Like you literally could always still love more and more.
Yeah.
You could always still learn more and more and more about someone. Okay, yeah, you might get sick of them for a little bit, but like if you're like really choosing to love them, then you're gonna like continually want to know more, love more.
No, definitely.
Rinse and repeat. Like that's, I would say, maybe the one thing that's worth it.
I think that's it, actually.
Otherwise, like
I was thinking about like my
first
thought. My first thought
was like, I was like, oh no, trying to set you up there to knock it out. And
my first thought was soccer, and I was like, well, I can't do that because my knees will hurt. So because
everything else will literally perish.
Especially because people keep changing, so there's never an end to that person.
Always something new.
So like you're in a relationship with somebody. 4 years later, that person is not the same person that they were at the beginning of that 4 years.
Yeah.
I'm not the same person that I was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
You're not the same person that you were 4 years ago. So, yeah, you're right. There's always something new and something more to that person that you can invest into that relationship. Yeah.
So relationships are literally the most important thing in the entire, like interpersonal human relationships. Like I wouldn't want to sacrifice my relationship with someone because I love French fries so much.
Yeah.
Right? Like that would be obviously very stupid. But some people actually like maybe have a disorder where like they just literally love French fries so much they just
eating addictions are a thing for sure.
Right. Like so then the question is, okay, what relationships are the most important and the most like which one like there's something that I desire in you, which is like to love and to know you.
Mm-hmm.
Which ones are actually best for me?
So I would say that your answer would probably be the one with God.
Dang, how'd you know that? Dang,
wild, isn't it?
Oh, we couldn't even go on a fun path to get there. Dang, all right, you saw right through that question.
Well,
I got some more convoluted questions.
I had to see through that one because I missed the first one. Yeah, I had to make up for it. No, I mean, yeah, that makes sense, right? And it's
right.
It's hard because if you're not growing up in a Catholic family, you were taught to have a relationship with God, but you were never taught why. You were never taught why that's even if you want to say any sort like the relationship with that higher being, like even if it's not just Catholic, when you're a kid, you don't understand generally. One, because you're a kid, but two, because sometimes you don't get taught. So like the idea of the perfect sacrifice, like I came to that through conversations with you and just thinking and reading other stuff on my own time. And it's the world of theology as taught to when you're growing up doesn't make a lot of sense because you're asked to take things on faith. You're like, you should just believe this thing. Like, well, why? Like, well, I don't. What if that doesn't make any sense? So I don't want to believe that. And like a good example of that is like having kids out of wedlock, right?
Sure.
There's a very practical reason for that, which was you see now that in modern society that not having both parents in the home, the kid is. I talked about this on the other podcast episodes. You're X times more likely to drop out of school, X more times more likely to get put in jail, do drugs, like all the bad things that like you would think of. There's studies on why you're more likely to do that if you don't have both parents in the home. I don't remember what the numbers were off the top of my head. Sue me. But in religion, when you're supposed to be raised within this framework of being, we'll say, a good person, right? Mm-hmm. Because people have different definitions of good, but for the sake of this, we'll say a good person. To do that, you need both parents in the home. And so the way that religion got around that, especially since there wasn't birth control, is, hey, don't have a kid. Well, don't have sex before marriage because there's no birth control. So that now roughly translates today to don't have a kid out of wedlock. But like that's where, at least to me, where it seems like that like rule, I guess, comes from. And when it's taught to kids now, they're like, what do you mean I'm not supposed to have sex before marriage? Like what?
Right. Yeah.
And it's not understood. And you like to go back through, right, and technology has kind of messed that up I'll say messed it up for the church from the standpoint of teaching it. But if it was taught in the way of like, hey, stay married so your kid has a better life, and maybe you should be married before you have that kid because you don't know if you're ready to make that decision because as a human, you're not all the way developed yet. I'm not saying you need to be married to be all the way developed, but most of the time if you're in a relationship, by the time you're married, you are fully developed. Yeah. So it's like, if it was, so like it had a very practical.
Yeah.
And is that accurate? Why? Part of the reason anyways?
I would think so. I mean, that's certainly Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century wrote like that as an exact reason of, a philosophical reason why fornication, sex before marriage, shouldn't be happening, because there's a possibility that a child could be conceived and then the child would not be adequately loved.
Yeah, so like
adequately cared for and raised.
Right. So
not that like wonderful things can't still happen inside of that chaos, but like
it is.
There's an ideal that we're working for.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
And no one taught me that. I stumbled across that on a conversation with somebody talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and the lack of, or the rate of single parents in the black community. And I stumbled upon that because the question was brought up. It was like, okay, so the school should teach the kids morals and ethics. And I was like, because we were talking about lying. And it got on to like, well, this, like they should be taught that in school. And I was like, no, the parents need to teach that. And they're like, well, what if both parents aren't in the home? And I was like, well, that's why they're supposed to be in the home. And then I was like, oh, that makes sense. That's why that's taught. But no one teaches. I don't know. I'm kind of a little bit off the rails right now. But generally speaking, I feel like that's the easiest example for the reasoning behind a lot of the things that are taught. There's extra reasoning, such as that, but the church as itself, right, hasn't been viewed, we'll say, in the best light recently. But because it just seems like there's all these rules, but there are good reasons for the rules. But you never hear the church talk about them, or I don't, anyways. Yeah, being. I'll call myself an outsider for the sake of this, right? I don't hear like, hey, this is where this came from. Maybe, possibly, we need to tweak one or two of them due to such things, right? Not saying that the church needs to tweak all its rules, but like to come out and say, hey, this is why this was a thing. We understand maybe it doesn't make sense now due to XYZ of the changing world. I don't hear that. And I think that turns a lot of people off to religion, especially now going back to what we were talking about. People are getting away from those frameworks and it's creating more chaos. But like this, you don't hear that, like that side of things from most religions. You just hear, well, you should believe that because you should have faith. And it's like, if you're not already like in it, right? Like, it's like, that's like, okay, well, that's a dumb reason. So
no, and there's a reason, like faith. So the supernatural should complement and work with the natural. So that's why, like when we see rules regarding like sex outside of marriage, like that's tied to a nature, because like we'll also look at these effects, look at this data that also says the same thing. Okay, I think one example of where of what you're talking about has happened actually, where like the church is like seeing, okay, this is one that we've reevaluated, is actually in the death penalty.
Really?
Yeah. So in seminary we studied a lot of St. Thomas. So St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, Italian Dominican. But he gave 5 good reasons. I'm going to not remember all of them right now because I just got to remember them all. But all of a sudden here. So, like, why the death penalty is a good thing. One of it is, like, to show an example that, like, hey, this thing is not okay.
So you're talking about the original view.
Like the original, like, 1300s. Okay. This is why Thomas Aquinas in that medieval society is saying, hey, this is a bad thing.
So they started off saying,
like, hey,
death penalty is bad? And now they've changed, or the other way around?
Other way around. The death penalty can be used in certain situations.
Okay.
In situations of grave matter,
Uh-huh.
It's going to like stop others from doing that same thing because they realize like, oh wow, yeah, that's right. This guy's literally losing his life because he did this thing. I don't want to do that. Another really big one of the 5 that I don't remember all of is that if that person knows that they are going to die, they have the opportunity at that time to make themselves right with God. Okay, to our modern ears, that makes absolutely no sense. And it's like, what are you saying? In that culture where every single person knew far much more theology than like even like the simple peasants knew far much more about God than certainly anyone, and maybe even myself. Just take my word on that for now. I don't want to go down a whole other rabbit hole looking at it.
Yeah,
but,
no, all good.
Yeah, like everyone knew that like they have to make themselves right before God when they die. And now you're being told, okay, great, tomorrow you're going to have to go to God and stand before Him and answer for the injustices you've done. You have the opportunity to experience mercy right now. You're still, like, you're going to die, but because what you did is extremely serious and justice demands this, but you now have an opportunity to lay yourself and have mercy on God. So what's recently happened is that a few years ago, Pope Francis said, prior to that, like in the 20th century, when the Catechism was published in 1994, you see that the death penalty is a morally okay thing, in that it is in some cases an aspect of justice in regards to evils that are done. In a scenario where everyone understands that this is an opportunity for mercy, this is an opportunity for like their own spiritual well-being. Pope Francis recently said and changed the Catechism, saying, really, there aren't actually really any scenarios in the modern era where the person can't just be put in life in prison and their life is a threat to other people isn't neutralized by life in prison. Like, the prison systems in pretty much all the world are able to stop the evil from continuing. Right. And people have lost a sense of justice in that and the opportunity for mercy in that medieval sense. So because of that, he said there are no situations in which the death penalty could be okay. So he's not saying the death penalty is wrong, so it's not a change. He's just saying that nowadays there is no opportunity to do this thing.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So I was about to add anything that I had heard of. So that's good that you threw that out there. And
then the other thing, like if you look at birth control and sex in general, like Catholic morality is based off of things. It's based off of an essence, right? Like, the way that you use that water bottle is based off of how that water bottle is. Like if you put, molten hot iron in that water bottle, it's gonna break. It's not gonna go well. It's based off of what that thing is. If I put like a cast iron or like a thing that's gonna be able to hold that molten hot iron in that water bottle, sure, then yeah, I guess I could pour molten hot lava in it. But
it's not what it was intended for.
Not just what it's intended for, but there are actually two different things there. Like there's still the water bottle, and then there's the metal thing inside of it. And the water bottle is being used in a way in which it's not actually made for. That's a really crude
no, that makes
example.
Sense. It makes sense though.
Yeah, like there's a way in which humanity exists, and a way in which humans are best becoming themselves, becoming what they're meant to be. And when we introduce other things that begin to change what we are, or change our anatomy, so that way we can do other things. Like if I were to get a like a 11th finger, back to this, so that I can type faster.
Yeah.
Because like sometimes when I'm typing, I can't get like the like the up and down keys.
The
like,
tab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like. Okay, that's like totally like. What's the point of that? Like, it's just it's superfluous and silly. It's like that's kind of almost like a changing of what I am. But if I were to even like neutralize, like if I were to like neutralize the ability of one of my organs to function, so that I could do something. Like if I could like make myself not taste anything, so that I could eat spicy food all the time.
Yeah,
because I enjoy that. Like that's gonna have other ramifications, like in my stomach.
Right.
But it's also like it's not like what the whole system is meant for.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And there is a lot of data regarding the pill regarding. Yeah. I mean, that like maybe introducing a whole bunch of synthetic hormones into your body isn't the best thing long term. Yeah, so there are a lot of complications and a lot of data that's shown that maybe these aren't the best things, but and sure there are simpler methods like a condom, which just like seems pretty like off and about. But again, that changes the nature of actually like what you're doing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We don't need to get into weeds here.
I don't necessarily agree, but it it makes sense from the standpoint of like why.
Yeah.
I think we shift gears a little bit. You sent me this diagram.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna not checking my text and pulling up the diagram. And then we'll get this for the YouTube. We'll get it up on the screen for you guys, and on Anchor, I guess we will have like a link to it in the description maybe or something like that. But basically, it just shows. You want to describe it?
Yeah. Basically, two sides to this diagram. One side is the left side is the human person with our faculties, what we're able to do. And then on the right side is something that we, like an object, something we want. And in the middle is our interaction with those things. And from, this builds from Aristotelian and then later on some Thomistic, again from St. Thomas Aquinas, some nuances throughout there. But basically, like on the left, you see like, all right, what is the human person? He's an intellect, so he can know things. He can actively and receptively, so we can like actually like I'm thinking about this thing, but I can also perceive and understand ideas as you're hearing them. And in there you have reasoning, judgment, and knowledge, which again are all things that happen high up in your intellect. Like these are like the smartest things that I can do as humans. I can make a judgment on whether this is a good thing. I can reason about them and know things. And that all happens in the intellect. And then there are these other powers that are kind of in the middle: memory, cogitation, imagination, and common sense. Common sense being these are really tied to the body. So like kicking a soccer ball, like it's just so ingrained in your memory. But if you see the ball starting to roll a little bit more, you have to begin to compensate for that. Yeah. And that's actually where the common sense will come in a little bit more. And now you're actually imagining, right? Like, okay, that cycle will drift a little bit. Now you have to adjust, and you have to adjust your bodily movement and the rest of the other decisions you're making, even with your intellect, based off of your sense of the world. But you're imagining that all right now in your head. You're seeing the soccer ball and you're seeing it move, and that imagination also is a part of your capacity, and cogitation, which is the a lower level of processing our ideas. So where do our ideas come from? Where do our anything come from? Really, it's the five senses. So on the very bottom there, so we see touch, taste, smell, hearing, and sight. And then from there, we abstract them. We're like, okay, great. I smell fresh cookies coming out of the oven. I know what that smell is, and that I can then imagine seeing the cookie there, like in the oven, starting to bubble a little bit, like just the cookie. I can see the cookie cooking in my head in the imagination, and I smell these cookies that are burning. Perks me up and thinks, wait a second, let's go fix this.
Right.
Or if I know that I lit a candle that was like a cookie dough candle.
Right.
I'm kind of my senses are literally deceiving me.
Yeah, you just want a cookie.
Right, and you're like, oh wow, now I want a cookie. And so your common sense, like everything is telling you, like everything related to your body is telling, ooh, this is a cookie. But then you still know, oh wait, no, I lit that candle. Like, that's not actually a cookie. That's something I have deeper. So then there's we go over to the right side, and we see that there is an apprehended good. So that's a good that is known in the intellect. So that's we've spoke a lot about like self-sacrifice, knowing that is a good, like that's an apprehended good thing in the world. And then on the very bottom you see the sensible or pleasurable goods, and those are things that like the body, like cookies. Those are good because they're delicious and they're sweet. And then in between, you see all those dotted lines. Okay, I don't want to get in the weeds on these parts.
Well, we might as well. We're here, aren't we?
Yeah. We'll do that in a second.
Go through the actions first.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Good. Right before that, though, the apprehended good and the sensible good. Like, they're over there and I'm over here. What drives me to the love of cookies are my appetites. My appetites, my inclinations of the body, of like what I need. So like, ooh, delicious cookies. Like that sensual appetite draws me towards the sensible good.
Right.
I know that if I go help out at the soup kitchen, that's a good thing. That's an apprehended good that I will be doing.
Right.
So you will draw yourself towards the rational appetite, towards the rational goods. That's
right.
Or even as something like, ooh, I want to watch this documentary, or like I want to continue thinking about this idea. Your rational appetite is what you understand to be good, because again, it's an understanded good. Could still be actually like an evil thing, but like what I understand to be a good thing, I'm gonna. It leads me out of myself.
Okay.
Towards. Then in the middle of that other red line is the passions. These are more complicated than just like, ooh, I sensually desire cookies,
right?
Or I want to know this, but it's a mix of the two. So that's maybe where the soup kitchen might come in a little bit clearer.
How so?
In that, I know that at the soup kitchen I will be helping other people and I'll be able to see their faces and understand and have a greater, not just intellectual apprehension that this is good, but a holistic, whole emotional understanding of a good that I'm looking towards.
Yeah.
Like a relationship, it might have a sensual good, and it also might have like a good of knowing, like a sensual good, and could be as simple as like you smile at each other, and that's just like that's a good thing. That's a happy thing for me.
But it also makes you happy.
But it also could be like the relationship, what you speak about, what you like, learning about the other and learning about like how you love the other. It's both, right? Like we can't really separate out the two, and so our passions are things that draw us in to those things, to both love it and hate it.
Okay.
So like, let's say I only knew a type of exercise where I would just literally throw up every time, and it was like just painful and terrible for my body every time.
Right.
You're going to literally hate it, and it's not just going to be an up here, I hate it, or like a sensual, I hate it, but it's
both.
Deeper in your emotions. There are two categories in regards to those, and we are going to skip those. We can't.
Yeah.
Go into all this.
That's all right.
One is more complicated than the other. That's the simple aspect to it.
Let's go through the Aristotle, the actions now.
So that long line across the middle, that long diagonal line, there are 12 actions. One of the intellect and one of your choice, one of your will. All from Aristotle's tradition here. Where first you perceive the end with your intellect. You understand, okay, great, cookies, good. Then you wish it, and you're like, oh, I want cookies. then it goes back to the intellect. Ooh, are cookies good for me right now? And then back to your will. Yes, I intend to like, I've made a judgment about these cookies. I will now intend that thing.
So it's perception, wish, judgment, intention.
So you actually like form your intention of, I should eat cookies about this. Then you're going to deliberate. How am I going to get to the cookies? And then you say, and then you'll come up with a means. And you'll say, I'll walk there. And then you say, okay, great. Now let's walk there. And then your mind says, great, let's walk there. And then you finally choose it. And then
decision, choice.
And then you reevaluate the means.
Reevaluate.
And so that's like an actual, now I'm doing the thing as you're then using it. And then you dually enjoy it, both in the intellect and the will. So a good thing will, so this could be of any, as we see, it'll lead to an action towards what we are drawn out to be and understand as a good, whether it be could be both a sensual good that I also apprehend as good, because again, this is a distinction between intellect and the body, but like I'm not like a mind floating around in my brain, right? Like I'm so intensely caught up in my body that I need to use both. Right. Which again is an aspect in which the Christian tradition has just so much astounded me in how, specifically the Catholic tradition, how the supernatural aids the natural. So how the intellect perfects the body. How the best good, which like objectively so, like the intellectual goods are better than sensual goods. So like
because you're actively choosing them.
They're just of a higher degree.
By actively choosing them, I mean it's not just something that you have to. Like, I know the actions go through and you have to make the decision for both things, but it's much more of a cognizant, like, I should do this thing because it's the right thing to do, and therefore it's a harder decision because it would be so much easier to not do anything than it would be to do this thing.
Well, even like whether or not something is hard doesn't necessarily...
Or,
right,
not,
but like
not necessarily hard, but it would be like, I could go help this person out, but it would be so much easier just to not do anything.
Right, like so it's easier just to sit here on the couch and enjoy the sensual pleasure of just sitting on the couch.
Right, so it's you have to actively go make that decision to go do it, rather than like, I feel like the sensual goods, the sense appetites are kind of more, it's like in the moment type things. And so it's not that it's easier to make the decision there, but it's like it's more based on like, okay, well, this pillow is soft and it feels good, and so I'm gonna put my head on the pillow. And it's like okay, well, that's fine. But the rational one is much more. It is just always going to be a better good. Yeah. Like the goodness of knowing something about your friend. Right. Is better than dinner. Right? Yeah. Like just as far as like a hierarchy of things, like there are ideas and like things that I know that are going to be better than, like they're just of a higher order. Yeah, that makes sense. So what is the purpose, or like what, I guess, so I say like what is this showing? Like obviously it's showing how the senses inform the human intellect, and then how that determines what decisions you're going to make. But what is, like, who came up with it? I think you said Aristotle, and Thomas Aquinas kind of tweaked it a little bit. But what was the origin, I guess, or what was the... Good. So if we look off to the far right, we see those parentheses, and they say zone of moral action versus, towards right at the bottom, morally neutral zone.
what Aristotle was concerned with in his Nicomachean Ethics was understanding how humans how humans are to live themselves, live, and how they're to achieve happiness. Like, how is a human being going to be happy?
It's kind of that framework, right, that we talked about earlier, that religious framework a little but. How is a human being supposed to live?
Right. And so he did it from a purely philosophical, in a Greek background, but in a purely philosophical manner.
Okay.
So he's trying to understand, okay, great. What are the words that I'm going to use? How am I going to understand the human person? Let me put this out there. So that way I can then begin to understand how a person, a woman might seek happiness. So there's the zone of actual moral action, which is always going to be something that's then associated with your will. But then at the very bottom where you see the morally neutral zone is where we see both our sense appetites and our passions are directed towards. So like our passions and our emotions, right? So often we've heard it said, like, our emotions aren't evil things.
Right.
Our emotions are incredibly helpful things that move us towards goods. And they're morally neutral, but they ought to be directed by our reason. So like, I shouldn't just go hog wild eating a whole bunch of cookies. Right? We get that. Like, eating cookies themselves and my desire for cookies, that's neutral. Yeah. But when I desire cookies over a friendship,
well, it's like even just thinking of the emotion, just like happiness, for example. Like I can be happy that something good happened to you, or I can be happy that something bad happened to you.
Right.
And so the emotion in itself is like, it is what it is.
Right.
But it's what you're happy about that determines whether or not that thing is, like, it's moral, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Whether it's actually good and will lead you to what you want. So that's where Aristotle is leaning towards in this. So Aristotle also, at the end of his Nicomachean Ethics, he actually ends up, this is cool maybe to see things kind of circle here, about how one of the best things that man can experience is friendship. And a true friendship that's actually focused on virtue. And maybe, I'm sure a lot of people, I hope, at least they've heard it before, there are 3 types of friendship. There's the utility ones of, like, that's your cashier, like your friends, and you only see each other when you're at work.
Right.
There's the friendship of enjoyment, of pleasure, which is like, your friends you party with, maybe you like friends on a soccer team. Like, it doesn't go much further than that.
Yeah.
And then there's a third type of friendship, friendship of virtue.
Right.
A friendship where you're actually really pushing each other to be the best at everything you're doing together. Not just together, like I'm pushing you in all of the areas that you want to grow, and you're pushing me in all the areas I want to grow. And not even like in that like focused sense of like where I want to grow. It's like where I need to grow.
Where you need to. It's just like those are what you consider just good friends, right? They push you to be a better version of yourself, even if it's not intentional. Like, I'm not sitting here like, Robby, I'm going to make you a better person today. It's just like, no, like, your friendship with that person happens to make you better because you balance each other out in different ways, and you push people to think of things that they hadn't thought about before, that sort of thing. Or like, even if you're like workout partners, like you push them to like lift more, do that extra rep, right? And what's super interesting is those 3 friendships. It's like, when I feel like this happens often with like philosophical and religious traditions, is they often spell things out that seem obvious once you hear them, but before that, like, you don't know that they exist, right? So when you talked about the 3 friendships, like, well, I can name people in all 3 categories immediately. And it's very simple, but I had never taken the time to categorize them. And it's kind of the same way I was talking about back in the beginning of the podcast about how human beings are kind of already acting on these principles. So like, I was already acting on the principles of I had those 3 types of friendships, but then to extract that out into defining what that means and the 3 categories that are there is a way it's way different than just doing it blindly. And it's like, and I see that across different traditions, different, like, you say, hey, you need balance between chaos and order. It's like, well, what do you mean by that? It's like, okay, well, you had this adversity at school, and then you graduated, and then it was over, and you needed to find something else to confront, something else to go after, and it's like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's like we don't think. I say we. It's hard for people, generally, I think, to think about that sort of thing, the why of why did I do this thing? Why am I feeling, why after I'm graduating, like I feel like I should be feeling happy, but I'm not. Like, why is that? It's like, well, because you don't have the next thing that you're going to go after yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like I should be feeling happy after this promotion.
So then,
or whatever the case is.
When we're like searching for that like greater happiness, like what's the next thing? Is it going to be what? Like, is it a project? Is it a thing? Like all of those will change, and at the end, I'll end up sitting in a nursing home.
Yeah.
You know, like on my back.
Yeah.
With like lunch all over my shirt. And then the question is, like at that point, what is the literal point of my life?
Yeah.
And to kind of come back to, okay, where at least I said it was going before. That it's in a relationship. Right. So I think like naturally, it is in a human and another relationship. So like at that point, like on your deathbed, when you can't do anything, and everyone is doing everything for you, who do you want to be there? All of your friends and family. You want them all to be there and have those those deep relationships of love for each other.
Yeah.
Now, how does Christianity supernaturalize? Like, take that what is natural of like that is natural, such a good natural thing. Where's the supernatural in that? Well, the answer is that relationship is meant to be with God.
Right.
Yes, the family. Yes, your friends. Yes, that like everything there, and then some, and then actually the very God who made you and literally came to bring you back from chaos and to deliver you from chaos.
Yeah.
And hopefully all your life has been, if nothing else, motivating you in the right way to make different sacrifices for your future and to endure the chaos that is this current world and the chaos that is your life. Hopefully, like that's what like a relationship, that's what communion with God like provides for Christians. It provides a eternal and loving relationship.
It's almost like here you've done well confronting the chaos of this life.
Well done, my good and faithful servant.
Well done. Yeah, exactly. That's a line from the Bible.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, it's like that. And then if you didn't do that well, you go sent.
I did not know you. Man.
You get sent to go confront more chaos in hell or purgatory.
Yeah.
Until you do it. Until you do it in the noble and truthful way that has been laid out by the framework. That's how it seems to me, anyways.
Yeah, I think that.
It's interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah, because the Christian aspect is not that, like, we need to be fighting chaos constantly.
Right.
Remember, the Christian, like the Christian, Judeo-Christian mindset of the world initially begins without chaos. Like, chaos is not necessary.
Right.
And it ought not be there. But it is here. And we're working on getting rid of that corruption. We're working on getting rid of it. Like, even, like we draw back to this diagram. And you've got like this diagram. Diagram. So I gotta text my mom. I just saw it. Yeah, like there are aspects of my passions and of my desires, and even of what I don't know, that could be wrong. That could be corrupted.
Yeah.
So like there is chaos that exists in me, right? Like it's not just chaos out in the world. Like there's chaos in me.
Oh,
I cause myself anxiety.
Yeah.
And so the entire Christian mission, like living the Christian life, is to both rid myself, my community, and the rest of the world of that chaos.
Yeah.
By letting God work in it.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson talks about that a lot. He talks about the true morality being confronting the dragon within yourself in such a way that you therefore enact out in a positive way yourself, and so it affects the people around you in a positive way.
Yeah.
That's kind of how he goes about, which it kind of ties into like the
Definitely does.
The Christian tradition of like personal responsibility, right? You're gonna face God at the end. Like it's only you. Like that's it. It's just you. You have responsibility for your own actions. It goes the same thing. Like it's your responsibility to face the corruption within yourself, the dragon within yourself, confront the dragon, the metaphorical dragon, and to be aware that it exists. Because if you're not aware that it exists, then it's like, if you're like, oh, I can't even hurt a fly, then like that's not even a decision to be made about whether or not you're going to be a nice person or not, because you don't think you can be that. But like once you're aware that you can be evil, you confront it, and then you actively make the decision to not do that.
Yeah. In
such a way that impacts everybody else around you in a positive way.
Yeah. No, I think Jordan Peterson does a fantastic job again. This is he does a very good job of describing the natural, and I think with even some greater insights of how the supernatural, what exists in the natural that's been revealed.
Yeah.
Of this is how we've learned amidst the Christian tradition for the past 2,000 years. So that he provides a very strong and robust understanding of the natural world.
Right.
But I think he even knows that and he attests to this, that he tries to back away sometimes from some theology and from some kind of moral theology.
He says he acts as if God exists and would be terrified if he did, is how he lives.
I think his biggest fear is that we should have an extreme fear of God because of how grand he is, right? And the necessity of which God will have justice on the world.
Yeah.
That's an absolute, we should be concerned about this.
Mm-hmm.
And that literally does work people into nervous wrecks as far as God does not love me because I sinned.
Have you heard his answer to the question of do you believe in God?
I vaguely. I know he dodges it.
Well, he doesn't. He does. So dodge, not dodge. The way he explains it is, so yes, in a sense he dodges it, but what he says is, so what do you mean by believe? Because is it believe based on what I say or what I do? Because if you believe in God, then you should be acting out those principles that God has laid forward. And if you're not acting out those principles, can you really say that you believe in God? And so how he says is what right do I have, being the imperfect human that I am, to say I believe in this perfect thing, that I'm supposed to be acting like that perfect thing, when I cannot do that? What right do I have to utter those words? Is kind of how he phrases it. And I thought that is a very interesting perspective for me, because I don't echo exactly how he thinks. Right, I'm still figuring it out for myself, but I hadn't thought of it in that way, because I know a ton of people that are like, oh yeah, I believe in God, and then they're jerks at everywhere else, and it's then why are you acting that way? And it struck a chord with me, especially with people that I had seen in churches growing up that were not nice in the slightest. Yeah. But you'd see them in church doing the most.
Yeah.
And it's how can you say you believe in God when you don't act as though, when you don't act in the way that he laid out in the perfect sacrifice, right? How we're supposed to emulate. You're not even close, right? But who am I to judge? But generally speaking,
it would seem that they're not making any effort to try to cooperate with grace.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way.
If God is trying to help us to move towards a greater moral perfection, why aren't you changing your life and being better year after year after year?
Right, and then how can you say you still believe in God when you don't do that?
Right, what do you understand God to be? What do you understand God to be this year?
Yeah.
Is he a God that's actually helping you, or is it a community that's just super nice to hang around and be with, or is it a God that desperately wants for you to live, for you to be with Him, living forever in heaven?
Yeah.
And that requires something of you to change of yourself today, to pray, to order your passions. And
what's your take on that answer then? Being as though you are training to be a priest that obviously believes in God. What is your take on that sort of perspective?
Yeah. Perspective again. So being that he is not.
He feels as though he doesn't have. He cannot utter the words "I believe in God" because he is a flawed and imperfect human being who does not emulate in the way that God had set out for us to be.
Yeah, good. This ties with. Do you think God doesn't know that?
No, I'm sure He does.
Right, like that's God certainly knows that you are, for lack of a better term, a sinner. Okay? Yeah, God certainly knows that. That's not a revelation to Him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he knew that before He showed up and told you the gospel. He God knew before, before you did something bad that God knew when He was giving you the good news and He's communicating His message to you. He knew that this is everyone down there is going to fumble with it. Everyone down there is going to mess it up. The point of Christianity is not that you are is that we're all perfect and happy.
Right.
The point of Christianity is that with God's grace, we keep trying. Mm-hmm. And yes, we should be getting better. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there have been just so many examples, sadly, in the church of on a larger scale of people that have not at all lived up to that, and not allowed their life to be changed by the gospel, and that is a great disservice to the message in general that God wants to communicate to God Himself, and so there's a lot of work to do. Hence my state of life.
Yeah.
A desire to love and serve our Lord as He's called me to serve Him in this particular way.
Yeah. All right. So sum up Catholicism as far as not necessarily what does it offer to people, but what sort of. I'm going to stumble through this question because I'm winging it. But what if you were to sum up Catholicism as far as a framework or sort of hey, this is a reason why you should live your life this way, to somebody who is unfamiliar with the traditions?
Yeah.
How would you go about doing this? So you're talking to me, right?
Right.
I don't want to call it a sales pitch because that cheapens what it is. But generally speaking, if you're going to give the sales pitch of Catholicism to me, and I know nothing about it, I'd be like, why should I live this way?
Yeah, because
I've seen all the bad press, right? I have a negative view, right? So it's because a lot of the world, I think, sees it in a negative way. But I think you and I, especially you and I both know that if lived out properly, it is a very, very good thing. So,
I think, well, first, we never understand, the principles of a thing are not varnished by people that don't follow the principles. Mm-hmm. If someone doesn't just listen to the rules of a game, they're not going to be a good example of that game, of what that game actually is meant to be.
Right.
What that thing is meant to be. The only thing that really lives it out, like you said, is someone living it out well. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the people, I think by far and away the best example is what in Catholicism we call the saints. Those maybe the most popular one to modern ears is Mother Teresa. Mm-hmm. Look at her life. Mm-hmm. She owns nothing. Mm-hmm. She has no husband, no children. You could say, maybe she's like a mega power lady because she ended up becoming the head of this religious order. Mm-hmm. But think about her at the beginning. What in the world would one a young woman want to enter the convent and spend all of her life praying in silence and not interacting in the world and owning nothing and having no husband or other sort of thing, and then leaving the comfort of at least knowing I get meals and I have a place to sit and pray and sleep, and leaving that convent, still remaining a religious sister, and walking outside those doors and serving the poorest of the poor who don't believe what she believes, and literally and help them die, but let them die knowing that they're loved. The absolute absurdity of that contrasted to the absolute goodness of it. There's something really peculiar there that makes that, like, turns out literally everyone's head. Like, that's why everyone is so fascinated by Mother Teresa. That's why they give her the Nobel Peace Prize. That's why she's invited to all of these different. She was invited to all these different countries to speak. But to her, like, if you read any of her writings, you will see at the very, very core of her life is Jesus Christ. Like, the very, very center of her life is loving God, and that motivated her to do every single thing. And it's in one sense what got her out of bed in the morning to do that. So if I could have even just a slice of that in my life, imagine how much better it would be. So yeah, that's your opportunity. It's to literally have no longer any care for the chaos of the world, but only care for really what God is wanting you to love in that place and in that moment. So that not just for yourself, but for the others around you and for the rest of creation, you can bring that order into the world.
Help others confront the chaos.
Yeah. And then, nice caveat, maybe, not caveat, nice, there's a bonus at the end. Life eternal.
Yeah.
Again, right, this relationship with God, like we all are all seeking this friendship, we're all seeking these relationships that are like better of knowing and loving. The most perfect and infinite love, the most perfect and infinite thing is God.
Right.
And if we have a friendship with Him, then we can literally spend the rest of your life in a loving relationship, not just the rest of your life, like the rest of eternity, in total love that will never end.
Huh. Sounds not so bad. I think that's a great way to wrap it up.
Yeah, that's
Robby, Renner,
that's
everybody. Bye, everybody.
Cool. Thanks, Eric.